The twinkling lights of Manhattan shimmered like stars trapped in glass. Elena Carter stood at the massive window of the 32nd floor penthouse, holding a crystal wine glass in one hand, staring at the city she once dreamt would change her life. 6 years ago, she had walked down the aisle believing love would conquer anything. But love, at least the kind she had given, was never enough for Nathan Carter. The dining table behind her was perfectly set: white roses, gold-rimmed plates, candles flickering in a soft glow. Her husband was late again. When the elevator dinged and the door opened, Elena didn't turn around. Nathan's voice came from behind her, brisk and indifferent, asking why the lights were so low. She replied calmly with one word: ambiance, sipping her wine. He dropped his leather briefcase with a loud thud and tossed his keys on the marble counter, complaining about being hungry and that she could have waited to eat. She told him she did wait and finally turned. She wore a soft champagne-colored silk dress that flowed over her frame. Her makeup was subtle, her hair curled just enough to show she'd made an effort. Nathan didn't notice. Instead, he unbuttoned his cufflinks and sat down, asking what the setup was even for. She stared at him and reminded him it was their anniversary. He blinked, paused, then scoffed and muttered something dismissive about 6 years of whatever this was. Her throat tightened, but she remained composed and clarified. 6 years of marriage. He cut into the salmon she had carefully cooked and repeated the word with indifference. They ate in silence, his knife clinking against the porcelain plate while she barely touched her food. Then he leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and said the words she would never forget. Marrying her was the worst decision of his life. The candlelight danced between them, but it couldn't soften the blow. Elena felt her heart thud, but she didn't flinch. She didn't cry. Not this time. She simply smiled, a slow, knowing smile. One he didn't understand. Nathan narrowed his eyes and demanded to know what she was smiling at. Elena stood and gathered her plate, answering with a soft nothing, just thinking how freeing honesty can be. He scoffed again and mocked her for being passive-aggressive and unremarkable. She calmly reminded him he still married her. He muttered that it was the biggest mistake and that he should have married someone like Rachel or Claire, women who challenge him and understand ambition. She responded coolly that those were women who adored his reflection in the mirror. He grew agitated, accusing her of lounging around with sketches and yoga classes and expecting him to fund her hobbies after quitting her career. Her grip on the sponge tightened. Once his approval had meant everything. Now his voice was just background noise. She turned, drying her hands on a linen towel, and reminded him that he had insisted she quit when his firm relocated, promising to support her designs when he got promoted. He rolled his eyes and told her to grow up. She replied that she did. She grew up the moment she realized she stopped existing in the marriage. Nathan shook his head and walked toward the bar, telling her to save the speech. As he poured another drink, Elena walked to the bedroom. Her heart wasn't broken. It was finally awake. In the closet, behind rows of cocktail dresses and unused handbags, sat a small suitcase. She pulled it out and opened a drawer filled with dozens of neatly folded sketches. Her designs. Raw, vibrant, full of life. Her real self had been alive and working quietly. She picked up her phone and opened a message thread from earlier that day. Marco Duvall had written that her portfolio was stunning and asked to talk on Friday. He wanted her on his design team and told her not to let anyone silence her brilliance again. She smiled again, this time for real. Nathan's voice cut through the hallway as he asked if she was going somewhere. He leaned against the doorframe, drink in hand, shirt untucked. She turned, composed, and said not tonight but soon. He looked at the suitcase and mocked her for running away. She corrected him. No, she was walking toward something. He scoffed and said she'd be crawling back. She told him that was doubtful and added he wouldn't recognize the woman she was becoming. He stared at her, confused. She was different tonight. Elevated, untouchable. And for once she wasn't trying to win his love back. She didn't need it. He asked sharply if she was seeing someone. Elena laughed softly and said no. but she was finally seeing herself. She closed the suitcase and walked past him. Later that night, as Nathan snored in their bedroom, Elena sat on the balcony with her sketchbook on her lap and her phone beside her. She scrolled through photos, dresses she had sewn in secret, models who had posed for her quietly, and Marco, smiling beside her after her portfolio presentation last week. There had been warmth in his words, encouragement, no judgment, no diminishing glances, just belief. She messaged him a simple thank you for believing in her, and said she was ready for Friday. His reply came quickly. Good, because the world was about to meet the real Elena Carter. She looked out over the city. 6 years of pain, one cruel sentence, and a brand new beginning. Paris, the city of light bathed in golden hour sunlight, casting a romantic glow on everything it touched. Elena Carter stood on the balcony of the Hotel Lutetia, her freshly pressed blazer catching the breeze. In her hands, a tablet displaying the finalized sketches for her debut collection. It had been 3 weeks since Nathan called their marriage a mistake. Since then, Elena hadn't shed a single tear, not because it hadn't hurt, but because she finally understood something liberating. She was never the problem. She had simply stopped trying to convince someone who had no intention of ever seeing her value. Now, someone did. Marco Duvall was a legend in the fashion world, known for reviving overlooked designers and transforming underdogs into icons. He had discovered Elena's work through a quiet Instagram account she'd been using to post her private sketches under the pseudonym E. Monroe. When he messaged her, she thought it was a prank. Now they were sitting across from each other in a sleek rooftop cafe, overlooking the Seine, sipping espresso like old friends. Marco said she wasn't what he expected. Elena, amused, asked how so. He told her she was more elegant than most young designers, that they scream with color, but she whispered with structure. He liked that. Elena smiled modestly, admitting she used to design loud, but over time started finding power and softness. Marco, without looking up, told her it was probably because she'd been silenced too long. Her smile faltered for a second, but she didn't deny it. Later, they walked through the streets of Le Marais, browsing antique boutiques and fabric shops. He asked if she married young. She nodded. 25. And did he support her dreams? Elena paused, running her fingers over a roll of fine silk, and said he did, until they threatened his spotlight. Then they became hobbies. Marco raised an eyebrow, calling it classic. She said she thought she was building a partnership, but realized she was just his shadow. Not anymore, Marco replied, stepping closer. She had the talent, the eye, and the backbone. That was the trifecta. Elena looked at him, really looked. He wasn't just a mentor. He was a mirror, showing her who she was meant to be all along. Back in Manhattan, Nathan was beginning to unravel. He hadn't noticed the changes in Elena before. The late nights, the hidden sketches, the way she started speaking less and observing more. But now, her absence was a storm. She didn't text unless it was logistical. She didn't ask about his day or his meetings. She wasn't around to fill the silence with empty affection. She was gone in all the ways that mattered, and yet she was thriving. He saw it in her social posts. Nothing revealing, just small, curated glimpses of Paris cafes, mood boards, fabrics, and anonymous models wearing unfamiliar designs. It infuriated him. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, he got an email from his firm's PR team. The subject, upcoming sponsorship, NYFW Mainstage Designer Lineup. Curious, he opened the attachment. His eyes scanned quickly, then froze. Featured collection debut, Elena Carter, presented by Marco Duvall. He read it twice, then a third time. It couldn't be. Elena. He slammed his laptop shut. Elena returned to New York the following week, walking through the airport like a woman reborn. Her hair was sleek, her style effortless. The staff who once waved her through first class without a glance now paused to admire her. She was no longer Nathan Carter's wife. She was Elena Monroe Carter, the name she would launch her brand under. Marco greeted her with a hug at the studio in SoHo, where the final fittings were being done. Models twirled, seamstresses adjusted, and fashion photographers lingered with interest. Marco spun her around slowly and said this was her moment. Elena whispered she never thought she'd be here. Marco replied that he did, the second he saw her sketch of the white cageback dress. She chuckled, remembering Nathan once told her it looked like a curtain. Marco raised an eyebrow and said it was closing the curtain on him now, wasn't it? They laughed. On the eve of Fashion Week, Elena stood before her collection, 10 meticulously crafted gowns, each one a quiet rebellion, a message stitched in silk and defiance. There was the Eclipse, a sleek black halter gown with a crescent-shaped open back. The Phoenix, a fiery orange layered dress with feather embroidery rising from the hem. And of course the Becoming, a soft dove gray piece, sheer at the sleeves, with a hand-sewn spine of pearls running down the back. Every piece had a story. Every thread carried her rebirth. The day of the show, the venue buzzed with anticipation. Paparazzi swarmed outside, industry leaders filled the front row, and backstage, Marco turned to her just as the lights dimmed. He asked if she was ready. Elena took a breath and replied she'd been ready for years. As the first model stepped onto the runway, a hush fell over the crowd. The music pulsed low and steady. The lights bathed the runway in warm, golden hues. One by one, her gowns came to life, elegant, haunting, powerful. The crowd was captivated. In the third row sat Nathan, jaw tight, hand clenched around the program. His eyes never left the models, never left her name, Elena Carter. He couldn't believe it. This was his Elena, the woman he called boring, unremarkable, the one he told to stop chasing childish dreams. The final model stepped out. It was Elena herself, wearing the Becoming. The room broke into stunned applause. She walked with her chin high, her presence commanding. Her dress shimmered under the lights, every pearl down her back reflecting a new version of herself, one that was never for him to own. Nathan's heart sank. Suddenly he realized what he'd thrown away. After the show, Elena stood in the green room surrounded by congratulations and press requests. Marco kissed her cheek and told her she was magic. She smiled and said he believed in her before she did. Just then, a familiar voice cut through the chatter. Elena. She turned. Nathan stood in the doorway, suit immaculate, face pale. She tilted her head and asked if he enjoyed the show. He stammered that he didn't know she was capable of this. She replied that of course he didn't, he never looked. He stepped forward and tried to explain he had been angry that night and didn't mean it. She held up a hand and told him to stop. He was right. He blinked. Marrying her was the worst decision of his life, because now he didn't get to claim the woman she had become. He looked stunned. Elena walked past him, into the crowd, where Marco waited with 2 glasses of champagne. She took one and turned back, offering Nathan a final smile. Your mistake became my masterpiece. The after-party was held in an industrial loft, draped in moody lighting and minimalist elegance, exactly the aesthetic Elena had curated for her brand. Journalists, influencers, designers, and celebrities mingled over champagne and music. But amid the buzz, Elena stood tall at the center of it all, her presence a quiet storm of grace and power. Everything felt surreal. She had once sat in the background of Nathan's corporate events, smiling politely while men in suits ignored her. Now they leaned in to hear her speak. This wasn't just a fashion debut, it was a reclamation. Marco whispered beside her, raising his glass, that she had shaken the whole industry. They were calling her the new face of modern couture. Elena sipped her champagne and admitted it felt strange to finally be seen. Marco told her she had always been visible, just not to the people who didn't know how to look. She smiled at that. It felt good, not the compliments but the knowing, that every seam, every sketch, every inch of her comeback had been built by her own hands. A young editor from Vogue approached and asked if The Becoming was inspired by anyone. Elena tilted her head thoughtfully and said yes, by the moment she decided to stop begging for love. Across the room, Nathan stood stiffly near the bar, a drink in his hand that he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He watched Elena surrounded by adoration, her smile real, her confidence unapologetic. This wasn't the woman he'd married. This was the woman he'd tried to suppress. And it terrified him. The realization landed heavy. He hadn't lost her. He had never deserved her to begin with. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. He started walking toward her, weaving through the crowd. "Elena," he said once he reached her, placing a hand on her arm. She turned slowly, her smile dimming just a fraction. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, privately. Marco took a step back but stayed within reach, watching Elena's face. She nodded once and walked with Nathan to the quiet rooftop terrace. The city sparkled beneath them. Nathan began by saying he was wrong, about everything. She crossed her arms, saying nothing. He told her he didn't know she had this in her. The show, the designs. She was incredible. She replied flatly that she always was. He just never looked close enough. He sighed and said he had pressure at work. He was under stress. She cut in and said this wasn't about pressure. It was about how small he needed her to be in order to feel big. He flinched. She continued, quiet but piercing, telling him he was cruel, dismissive, and had mocked her dreams. He made her feel like she was lucky he chose her. But in truth, he was the lucky one. Nathan said he was sorry and that he didn't mean what he said that night. "But you did," she interrupted. And she was glad he did, because if he hadn't, she might still be stuck in that penthouse, shrinking herself to fit into his world. There was a long silence. Nathan finally asked if she was with Marco. Elena raised a brow and said, Marco respected her, but no, not romantically. Relief flickered in Nathan's eyes. "Don't look so hopeful," she added, because she was no longer available, not to anyone who doubts her worth. Nathan looked down, ashamed. He said he just missed them, missed us. Elena gave a soft, almost sad smile. There was no us. He ended that. He couldn't insult the foundation and expect the house to stand. The door opened behind them. Marco stepped out quietly, holding Elena's wrap. He asked if she was ready to go, eyes on her, not Nathan. Elena turned to him and nodded. Nathan straightened and asked if she was leaving. "Yes," she said, slipping the wrap over her shoulders. Her story didn't end with a man realizing too late that she mattered. She turned back to Nathan one last time and said he didn't break her. He revealed her. Then she walked away. 2 months later, Elena's face appeared on the cover of Elle magazine beside the headline, "From Discarded Wife to Fashion's New Queen, Elena Monroe Carter's Silent Revolution." Her collection had sold out within weeks. Celebrities were requesting custom designs. Her studio, a light-filled space in Tribeca, buzzed with life. Interns, designers, stylists. Her world was full now. Her favorite part? She had built every inch of it from the ashes of the woman she used to be. Marco entered her office one morning with coffee in hand and said they wanted her to headline Paris Fashion Week next spring. She blinked. Already? He told her she was a star, and stars don't wait. They rise. She laughed softly, accepting the coffee, and said, "What if she wasn't ready?" He told her she was past ready. She was on fire. She gave him a grateful look and thanked him for everything, for seeing her. He smiled and said all he did was shine a light. She was already there, waiting. That evening, Elena stood alone in her apartment, barefoot on the balcony. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text. From Nathan. He said he saw the article. She looked powerful. He was proud of her. She stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it. No reply. Some things don't need closure. Some chapters end better when left unopened. As she turned, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. Strong posture, a soft smile, a woman at peace. The world hadn't changed. She had. Marrying her was the worst decision of his life. But for her, it was the beginning of everything. The Louvre Cour Napoleon glittered under soft twilight, transformed into a floating runway for the final show of Paris Fashion Week. Glass panels reflected the night sky. Violinists played live under golden lights, and the audience, clad in silk, velvet, and status, waited with breathless anticipation. Then came the announcement. Presenting La Renaissance by Elena Monroe Carter. The music swelled. Models floated down the runway in gowns that seemed woven from air and fire, sculpted bodices, daring silhouettes, whispers of rebellion and elegance stitched into every seam. Backstage, Elena stood in a tailored ivory pantsuit, powerful, feminine, commanding. Her hair was slicked back. A tiny pearl earring sparkled on one lobe, the only remnant from the life she'd once shared with Nathan. The crowd erupted in applause as the final model exited. Journalists rushed to file headlines. Fashion houses whispered about partnerships. Celebrities stood to clap. And in the VIP row, 2 seats remained empty. Elena had declined to invite Nathan or anyone from her old life. Some ghosts didn't deserve a seat at her rebirth. Later that night, she sat alone on her Paris balcony with a glass of wine, watching the Eiffel Tower twinkle in the distance. Marco sent a text. "The world bowed to you tonight. You were magnificent." She smiled, then looked up at the stars. Not long ago, she was just a quiet woman in the shadows of someone else's life. Now she was a woman who had designed her own freedom and wore it like a crown. He lost her with 7 careless words. She rebuilt her empire with silence, thread, and fire. And she never looked back. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Bye. See you in our next video.